Welcome to Meridian Audiobooks. Tonight, we journey deep into the wild heart of South America, a world of vast marshes, dangerous rivers, untamed cattle country, and one of the most feared predators of the jungle, the jaguar. But before the story begins, there is one important word you should know. Throughout this audiobook, you will hear the word tigre. In this story, jaguar refers to the actual animal, Panthera onca. Tigre is the local term used in the region for the jaguar. A tigrero is a jaguar hunter, a man who hunts the tigre, and tigres, the plural, means jaguars. So whenever you hear the words tigre, tigrero, or tigres, remember we are talking about the jaguar and those who dare to hunt it. And now, prepare yourself for an extraordinary true life adventure, the story of a man who entered the wilderness, faced jaguars at terrifyingly close range, and became legendary for confronting them with a weapon far more primitive and dangerous than a rifle: a spear. This is the incredible story of Alexander Sasha Siemel. Welcome to his world. Welcome to Spear vs. Jaguar, the incredible adventures of Sasha Siemel. Let the adventure begin.
Chapter 1. The Devil Jaguar. The lone horseman rode slowly through the afternoon heat, the first airborne waft of death fouling his nostrils from somewhere ahead in the towering grass of the Pantanal. As he reined in, standing in the stirrups to see, the muffled ghoulish croak of urubi vultures filtered through the stiff stalks, and one of the man's following mongrels gave a low whine of fear. Instinctively, he slid the old muzzle-loading gun from its scabbard and checked the percussion cap seated over the nipple. Drawing back the hammer, his brown face set into a hard, swarthy mask, José Ramos touched the horse's flanks. He knew what he would find. By the sign, it had been early that morning, but by now the searing tropical sun of the western Brazilian Mato Grosso and the birds had nearly finished what the killer had begun. Lowering the gun, José Ramos watched the gorged vultures lumber off, their filth-smeared wings catching the air after a series of obscene hops. Dismounting, the vaquero inspected the gaping fang holes in the skull of the eyeless cow, recognizing them instantly. The heat of his fury chilled with the despair of realization. This was the 13th of the small herd to be slaughtered, and not even for food. It was a terrible loss for the little family trying to eke out a living in the vast and lonely Charaya's marshes. If this devil cat was not killed, José Ramos knew that he and his wife and child would be ruined. If no one would help him, he would kill him this himself. No matter that his gun was old and his dogs cowardly, was he not a man? See, this thing would be necessary, and so he would do it. Remounting, he carried the muzzle-loader in his right hand and whistled the cringing dogs forward on the heavy scent trail that led away through the thick grass towards a capao, an island of tall buriti palms and strangler figs that loomed in emerald solitude above the grass 500 meters away. As he rode towards the grove, two hard yellow eyes watched from the shady limb of a fig. As smoothly as poured oil, a tremendous male jaguar rippled to the ground and was swallowed up by the grassy undergrowth. In less than 10 minutes, Maria Ramos would be a widow. A single yelp of mortal pain sliced the shimmering heat like a sliver of broken glass. Ahead, somewhere in the thick grass, one of the cur dogs lay disemboweled, eyes already glazing as flies swarmed the torn pink-gray ropes of intestines protruding from the huge gash in its side. The other dog broke cover and shot past the horseman in a brindled flash of tuck-tailed panic, disappearing quickly on the path home. Filho da puta, thought José Ramos. It had been so easy for the tigre. As he had done so many times before, the cat had simply looped back on his own trail and with a lightning lunge ambushed the dog, raking it with a paw stroke that could spurt the brains from a steer's ears. Sweat beading on his sun-baked skin, the man gritted white teeth and urged the horse onward. If he went quickly, he might get a shot. Pray Sao Antonio will it. The horse shied at the dog's mutilated body, nostrils flaring at the smell of blood and offal. José Ramos gave only a glance downward, his eyes probing the grass ahead for movement.
Beyond, the kapow and shorter cover would give better visibility. The horse broke into a clearing. José Ramos was only a few steps into the opening, eyes darting for a glimpse of the tigre. Halting the horse, he dropped the reins to steady the gun with both hands. "Come out, demon," his brain screamed, but he knew better than to shout aloud. He knew it was watching him. He could feel the eyes, and a strange shiver scampered up his spine despite the awful heat. And then it came. There was the smallest whisper of movement from his right rear, and a golden shape exploded out of the edge of the grass with terrifying speed. A numbing, stunning shock smashed José Ramos from the saddle, the gun with its load of chopped nails spinning away unfired. Dazed on the ground, he started to raise himself to his knees, dully hearing the pounding of hooves as the horse hammered away in terror. Again, the impression of something huge and golden moving directly at him, very, very fast. There was no pain as the thick, hooked claws slashed through meat and sinew, red rivers welling in their wake. There was no pain as the big fangs drove deeply through the back of his skull. There was nothing at all. The body lay still, a huddled lump on its destroyed face. As the jaguar watched, fangs framed by bloodied black gums, the gore that had spurted from the ripped artery ceased, thickening quickly in the hot sunshine. Cautiously, the big cat sniffed the corpse, unable to stifle a snarl of disgust at the familiar, hated smell. Above, urubi were gathering, the first flapping noisily to light in the top of a buriti palm, others spiraling down to perch expectantly. With a soft series of grunts, the tigre stalked off to lie up in the shade. Assassino, the great cattle-marauding jaguar of the Charayes marches, had become a man-killer. It was full dawn before the terrified horse found its way back to the tiny fazenda, or ranch, of the Ramos family. Maria, haggard and emotionally exhausted from a night without sleep, ran outside to catch it, her heart turning to lead as she saw the dark bloodstains on the rough wooden saddle and the 2 long claw marks on the horse's flank. Swiftly, she mounted the tired horse and lashed him along the trail towards Hija do Caracara and the camp of the famous tigrero, Señor Siemel. He would not help before. Perhaps now he would. Chapter 2. The Man Who Hunted Jaguars with a Spear. Of all the great hunter-adventurers of the recent past, none had a career in the wilderness that quite compared with that of Alexander Sasha Siemel. Every continent has had its great heroes of the hunt. Selous, Harris, Baker, and dozens of others were the bright names of Africa. Corbett of India, Buffalo Bill Cody, Hugh Bridger, and Hugh Glass of the American West. Each in his time, place, and company left indelible evidence of the magnificence of the human spirit under stress. But South America? Since the days of the conquistadors, there have been few men in the field of hunting prominent enough to hang your sombrero on. That, to be sure, doesn't mean they weren't there. Most of the reason these men did not achieve the worldwide recognition of their counterparts is that either they never published or their works were not translated from Portuguese or Spanish. Sasha Siemel is the notable exception for more reasons than one. He alone of all the famous bushmen made his name and reputation not with the rifle but with the bow and spear, hunting the most dangerous New World big cat as the Aborigines had done for untold millennia. Of course, there was nothing new about bow hunting at the time that Sasha Siemel was taking jaguars.
White pioneers such as Howard Hill and the classic twosome of Pope and Young had all killed the most dangerous of big game with bow and arrow. The difference is that they didn't do it as a steady diet for a living. One American cowboy, Buffalo Jones, even went to Africa to rope lions, which he managed successfully, but this cannot be considered as more than a sporting, although very brave and skillful, prank. It is the difference, however, between hunting with a bow and killing jaguars with a thrusting spear that set Sasha Siemel apart, in the opinion of many at the very top of the rank of the truly great hunters. If you plan on being a professional spear hunter of jaguars, there are more convenient places to be born than Riga, Latvia in 1890. Sasha solved this problem by following his brother Ernst to Argentina and in 1914 to the backwaters of Brazil. His personal story is a dark reflection of the wild land and the ferocious individuality of a frontier people. A world of feudal honor, murder, intrigue and jealousy blended with the savagery of the tropical jungles and marshes, with their swarming, blood-feeding insects, ravenous piranha fish, fer de lance and bushmaster snakes, and giant jaguars, tigres, the largest and most dangerous of the American cats. Sasha was not an especially big man. In his prime, a bit under 6 feet tall and weighing 180 pounds, with a red-blonde beard and blue eyes. But for his size, he was immensely strong and quick, a gifted wrestler and fighter. In his earlier days in Brazil, he fought many times against professional strongmen and terrible Turk types, usually winning the bouts and prize money handily. His physical prowess had a dark aspect, though, that earned him the blood enmity of such lesser men as one Ricardo Favale, a fellow employee of Siemel's at a silver ships shop in the little town of Passo Fundo. For months, a deadly feud had been building up between the men, which culminated with Favale trying to shoot Siemel, forcing the Latvian to take away the revolver and rearrange the general contour of Favale's skull with the butt. Although the French-Brazilian survived, Sasha thought he had killed him and lived much of his life under the impression that he was a wanted murderer. Actually, Favale was to come to a far more exotic death, as we'll see a bit farther on. It was while this feud was warming up that Siemel first heard stories of a legendary old Guato Indian some 1,000 miles away who possessed an ancient skill. He was a tigrero, a master of the art of spear fighting the jaguar. The revered title of tigrero, in its true Brazilian sense, meaning one who hunts jaguars professionally with a spear, as opposed to the more common Spanish usage indicating merely a hunter of tigres, had only been used with reference to a very few Indians. Normally hunting in groups, some tribes, like the Guato, did produce a real tigrero every few generations, a solitary paladin who fought single-handed in the jungles and marshes with his dogs, usually for hire to ranch owners whose cattle were being killed by jaguars. Mostly aspiring tigreros never reached fame because of the very nature of their calling. They died from their early mistakes under the claws and fangs of their intended prey, just more moldering bones in the jungle. With only a lance blade between an infuriated 300-pound jaguar and sure death, a single error of judgment or timing was fatal. Even a bullfighter, a torero, could make mistakes and live.
Who has achieved fame in that profession without many cornadas and hundreds of stitches after goofing? There are always others to draw off the bull and an infirmary with expert medical help immediately available. Not so with the tigrero. Alone with his feline adversary, he had to kill or die. If a jaguar could get between the spear point and the man's body, there would be no help. No mistakes were allowed. So why would anybody, white or Indian, with anything between his ears but solid bone, want to hunt jaguars on foot, armed only with the zagaya, the Indian spear? There are as many answers to that one as there are reasons men hunt, fight, skydive, gamble, or take up with red-headed ladies. In the peculiar high, thick swamp grasses of the western Brazilian Pantanal, or marshes, Siemel claimed that, incredibly, spear hunting was safer than using a rifle. It was his logic, certainly not without foundation, as he killed well over 300 jaguars in his career, that when visibility is down to a matter of a few feet and the gun misses or wounds, the jaguar will either charge instantly before another shot is possible or escape into the anonymous grass. If he charges, he will nearly always kill the hunter. With the zagaya, a man can continue to fight, keeping the cat off him so long as he has the strength to resist. That, to be sure, is the technical side of the answer. Much more, as typified by Siemel's outlook, lies in the eternal mystique that has always existed between man and the deadly game animals. As we have examined in other works, the difference between shooting an elephant at 100 yards through the chest and stalking a big tusker to within 10 or so yards is the difference between simple animal assassination and real sport hunting. When you are within 10 yards of a bull elephant, you, my friend, are in harm's way. With the long shot, one kills an elephant in a sterile, riskless, and, in my opinion, cowardly manner. At halitosis range, you enter into the most ancient non-biological passion of humanity, self-testing, and on purpose, which is the most important aspect of the implied morality of the act. Nobody stuck a .45 in your ear and forced you to get so close that you can smell the peanuts. Quite the contrary, you probably paid the equivalent of a deposit on Westminster Abbey for the questionable privilege. Isn't it just peachy? What fun to stand there listening to the blood roar in your ears, your stomach flapping around like a startled bird, your hands so shaky and sweaty that the rifle feels like a freshly peeled sapling. A bystander would think it was you against the elephant. How wrong he would be. The point of big game hunting is not just a matter of killing something that can bite back, but of how it is done and how much risk to which the hunter purposely exposes himself. It all comes down to that timeless moment between slamming heartbeats, when you know for an absolute certainty that if you lose your nerve or blow the shot, you are going to die. Dead, as in forever. No more pungent amber scotch, no more sea breezes over the malachite flats, no more charcoal-crusty slab-sided steaks, no more mysterious girl aroma in the twilight, not even any more taxes once the IRS finishes mauling your bedraggled carcass for the last gold inlay. Like most things in life, you only get out of an experience what you put into it. There is no emotional free lunch either. This is acutely the case when hunting jaguar with a spear. A tigre that's been taking his vitamins will weigh twice as much as an average man and is probably 5 times stronger. As a cat, he's considerably quicker, forcing the hunter to fight a counterpunch game, reacting to the cat's tactics while controlling the overall strategy as much as possible. In all the world of hunting, there could be little more satisfying than beating a big man-killing cat on his own terms, alone and on foot, muscle against muscle, steel spear blade against ivory fang. I have hunted and killed African Cape buffalo with a thrown spear for much the same reasons Sasha Siemel fought his jaguars, but I promise you faithfully that I have no intention of trying my luck on any tigres. I guess I'm just not that emotionally starved.
Chapter 3. The Tigrero of the Pantanal. The 60-year-old Guato Indian known as Joaquim was a misty legend throughout the thousands of square miles of the upper Paraguay rivers Xarez and São Lorenzo Pantanal when Sasha first heard of him from an old bounty hunter in Paso Fundo, Don Carlos Rodriguez. A very colorful sort, if he wasn't on your trail, the one-eyed Rodriguez kept a tally of his own human kills by stringing their dried ears on the length of cord that hung over the front door of his home, a most effective bit of advertising that served the same purpose as a cobbler displaying a large wooden boot over his shop. At this time, just before his disagreement with Fauvel exploded into violence, Sasha felt he was in a most awkward spot. To let Fauvel kill him was pretty obviously not the answer, nor did he want to kill Fauvel, because the little man's friends would hire either Don Carlos or some other pistolero for revenge.
Both Sasha and his brother Ernst had been considering a trip to look into business possibilities in the remote Mato Grosso along the Bolivian and Paraguayan borders and had decided to leave Paso Fundo. Don Carlos Rodriguez, who had years before seen Joaquim Guato, Indians took their tribal name as their surname in many cases, spearfight a jaguar, told the tale to Sasha, who became intrigued and determined to seek out the old man in the Mato Grosso marshes, if possible. After his fight with Favel accelerated his plans slightly, he left with his brother for this primitive land, along the way picking up a cowboy named Aparicio Pinheiro, whose badly infected garrapata tick bites Sasha doctored. Taking odd jobs, particularly repairing simple machinery and guns, the three pushed sporadically north from ranch to ranch until finally reaching the Pantanal. At last, Ernst having decided to stay in a town, Sasha found Joaquim Guato on the fazenda of Señor Chico Pinto on the São Lorenzo River. It was an especially filthy and dilapidated mud and thatch hut along the river, containing one very drunken Indian stoned out on caña, raw cane spirit that could strip paint or power a diesel engine. Although Joaquim could hardly speak, he did confirm that he was indeed the great tigrero of southern legend. With the unlikely spearman was his best dog, a slat-ribbed reddish mongrel called Dragon, whom Joaquim extolled as being the finest jaguar dog in all of Brazil. It was, he explained candidly, because of the insult of a rancher offering mere money for the dog that he had decided to assuage his injured sensibilities with caña. In any case, although Sasha thought he would need a week to sober up, the Indian offered to take Siemel hunting the following morning. To Sasha's surprise, Joaquim arrived, bright-eyed if not exactly bushy-tailed, with Dragon an hour before dawn. After several miles of hard walking, Sasha carrying his Winchester and camera case, he had been anxious to photograph a jaguar. Following the bare-chested Indian armed only with his zagaya spear, Dragon hit the trail of a puma or mountain lion, the spoor still fresh. It wasn't a tigre, but it would do. Although Sasha was as tough and durable as dried boot leather, it was all he could do to keep up with the barefoot Indian chasing after the howling dog. After a half hour, the puma came to bay in a lapacho tree, and the men came up with Dragon on guard below. Pumas are odd animals, as large as big leopards but most inoffensive with regard to man. Although the species ranges from Alaska to Argentina and eastward as far as the Florida Everglades, there have been only one or possibly two documented cases of man-killing or eating in its long history. It's apparently a matter of species personality with this otherwise powerful, muscular, and well-armed cat, which kills deer-sized animals with ease, that it is almost invariably shy and non-aggressive toward man.
In America's western states, pumas are regularly treed by dogs and captured with ropes, a performance which, if attempted with a leopard, would create a waiting list at any fair-sized hospital. Still, if cornered and pressed hard enough, even a field mouse will take the offensive sometimes. After Siemel took a picture of the cat, the puma showed nervousness and leapt to a lower branch. Joaquim had indicated that Sasha should take the shot, which he did, hitting the chest. Mortally wounded, the puma leapt from the tree and fell over, but then recovered and jumped at Siemel. In the blink of an eye, fate threw a roundhouse low blow. At the same second that the cat was in midair, Joaquim and Dragon attacked simultaneously, the Indian with the spear and the dog with bared teeth. As he hurtled for the puma's throat, Dragon passed between the slashing zagaya blade and the cat, the point penetrating completely through the dog's neck and on into the puma's shoulder. The mountain lion was dead before he hit the ground. Dragon lived only a few seconds. The old Indian deep in stunned grief, Sasha returned home to the hut where he was staying, leaving Joaquim Guato alone in his misery. The next morning, Joaquim came to Siemel's hut with two scraggy-looking dogs, the smaller of which was named Valente. As a gesture of friendship, the Indian presented Sasha with his choice, recommending Valente as a potential pack leader. Sasha was touched. He knew that Senor Pinto, his host, had offered a great deal for the dog and had been refused. In return, Siemel gave Joachim his Winchester, although Julian Duguid, Sasha's early biographer, says it was a double-barreled .32 pistol, not as payment for the dog, but as a return gift between hunters. Joachim had told the white man that he had decided not to hunt for the next 2 months, and Sasha headed north to the newly discovered diamond fields on the Rio Garza with Aparicio Pinheiro. 10 weeks later, Siemel returned to find the Guato as drunk as usual, yet again ready to hunt the following day. The next morning, with Valente in the lead, a big male jaguar was cornered in a stand of acudi palms, and Siemel witnessed his first spear fight.
Chapter 4. Learning the Spear. It was an incredible tableau that the novice came upon, a furious male tigre encircled by baiting dogs that dodged and lunged, staying clear of the flickering paw strokes, as the cat, ears laid back and snarling, made short rushes at one dog, only to be nipped in the rear by another. Then the half-naked Indian stepped into the scene, his heavy spear pinned between his right elbow and his side. It was a completely different Joaquin Guato, on sure, bare feet, eyes clear, stare locked on the jaguar with terrible concentration. As he saw the man, the tigre froze, ignoring the dogs, a rose-headed statue with glowing yellow eyes wide with calculated hate, as the Indian moved slowly nearer. The distance between them shrank in ominous silence, each jungle killer measuring the other. At 3 yards, the man stopped, the zagaya low and leveled. A puff of flying dirt erupted from Joachim's feet as he kicked a clump of earth and leaves straight into the jaguar's twisted face, goading him into a charge. Confused and furious, the big male tigre was just beginning his rush as the Indian feinted the spearhead at the cat's throat, drawing a lashing claw stroke. In a blink, he stabbed home as the charge began, the blade driving into meat up to the crossbar where it joins the shaft, slicing deeply into the neck. It seemed impossible that the frail hunter could hold off the raging fury of the 300-pound jaguar as it fought the spear, sometimes lifting the little man clear off the ground as he clung to the shaft. Somehow he kept his balance, for to fall was to die. Suddenly, the tigre backed up a few feet, trying to wriggle off the spear. Joachim was with him, jerking the bloody blade free, and, as fast as a closing steel trap, driving it full into the dappled chest. As the man turned on the shaft, the jaguar was now on its back, the chest matted with wet crimson. With all his strength, the Indian worked the spear in the wound, and the struggles of the stricken cat grew feebler, at last stopping with a shudder that ran the length of the body. The dogs moved in to worry the carcass as Sasha expelled a breath he had been holding in petrified fascination throughout the fight. He was hooked. What for the Latvian had been a smoldering desire burst into a wildfire of passion to match himself with a jaguar with the zagaya. He would become a tigrero or spend his life in the attempt. Spear hunting, after throwing rocks or beating a prey animal's head into mush with a club, is probably the oldest form of hunting with a weapon. Before the atl type javelin or dart launcher was developed, and later the bow, the only way primitive man had to place a cutting edge into the body of his victim was to attach it to the shaft of a stick, which created the spear. In the very early days, passive hunting was likely the most productive way to kill bigger game, either with pitfalls or by driving herds over cliffs.
Yet, as weaponry improved, active hunting, which involved stalking and killing, became the measure of our beetle-browed forebears' prowess.
In many parts of the world, it still is today. The vestigial heritage of this way of life can be seen very clearly, especially around modern Madison Avenue or Wall Street. From the most elemental point of view, hunting with the spear falls into two main categories: throwing and thrusting. Obviously, the object in either case is to place the spearhead with its sharp-cutting edges where it will do the greatest physiological harm. Like the arrowhead or sword point, the principle is to disrupt the circulatory system by hemorrhage, thereby cutting off the flow of oxygenated blood to the brain. When you think about it, a spear, an arrow, or even a bullet through the heart actually causes death by asphyxiation, as the heart ceases to pump and the brain dies of oxygen starvation. The greatest danger in hunting big game with the spear is that it forces the hunter into very close proximity to his quarry. The spear may be perfectly placed, but considerable time can elapse before the prey loses consciousness and dies, every moment of which it may spend tearing sirloins and rump roasts out of the hunter. In the case of the throwing spear, or javelin, the advantages and disadvantages tend to offset one another. The problem lies in the fact that few people can throw a spear very far with any reliable accuracy, and precision placement in a vital area is all important. Also, in the case of fast-reacting game or men in battle, the giveaway movement of the throw, as well as the slow flight time of the spear, can permit dodging, which negates the probability of a hit. The positive side of the matter is of distance. Once thrown at something big and ugly, the hunter is free to run like hell with a head start. As one tribe in New Guinea, whose national sport is placing their neighboring warriors en brochette, tells their young men the only thing more important than being a good spear thrower is a very good spear dodger. Where the spear is most in evidence today, Africa, the throwing type ranks about equally with the assegai, which is a short stabbing spear popular with the southern Bantu races, such as the Zulu. Far more game in Africa is killed with the arrow than the spear, but certain animals are hunted with the spear under local conditions that may vary widely. Among the Nilo-Hamites, such as the Maasai, Nandi, Karamojong, Samburu, and others, the spear is always used on lions, and in some blooding rituals for elephants. The Bambuti pygmies of the Yaturi forest in the Congo region regularly hunt elephants with a wide-bladed stabbing spear lent to them by their Bantu neighbors. In this unbelievably dangerous form of hunting, they stalk right up to the selected elephant and thrust from beneath for the kidney region, and then dash away. Needless to say, elephants don't like this very much, and a great many pygmies don't get a chance to try this more than once, their first and last time. The great classical animal hunted with the thrusting spear has been the European wild boar, Sus scrofa, and hunting literature from the Persian cylinder of 600 BC in the British Museum to the present day varies little in awed appreciation of the savage ferocity of this grand animal. It was killed in most acceptable form on foot, with a heavy spear incorporating one or another stops or crossbars to prevent the animal from coming right up the shaft at the hunter. Gaston Phoebus, author of one of the earliest European books on hunting, published in Paris in the early 1500s, offers some advice on spearing a charging boar while on foot. Hold your spear about the middle, not too far forward lest he strike you with his tusks, and as soon as the point has entered the body, take the haft of the spear under your armpit and press and push as hard as you can, and never let go the haft. And if the beast be stronger than you, then you must turn from side to side as best you can without letting go the haft, until God comes to your aid or other assistance reaches you. Boar hunting may have had a lot to do with the popularity of religion in the Middle Ages. Certainly, during a large boar drive, the woods must have been ringing with invocations of the deity. The so-called sport of pig-sticking became immensely popular with the British cavalry units in India and developed into a real art form.
Although done from horseback, an amazing number of men were killed by the boar, not to mention the slaughter of their mounts under the self-whetting ivory scissors of the boar's tusks. A wild boar is a terrible opponent for a spearman, granted, but a cat is something else again. To appreciate the degree of risk involved with taking on a jaguar, alone, on foot, with but a zagaya, the animal itself has to be considered. Panthera onca, the jaguar, is one of the least studied of all the big cats, excepting possibly only the snow leopard of the remote Himalayas. The reason for this neglect is largely that jaguars thrive in some of the most difficult terrain on Earth, the jungles of Central and South America, where sheer lack of visibility greatly hinders observation. This is not to say that jungle is their sole habitat. Jaguars also live, in reduced numbers because of controlled hunting to keep them from killing cattle, in the grassland marshes typified by the Shariah's Pantanal, where Siemel hunted them for more than 30 years.
Very recently, Dr. George B. Schaller, the well-known wildlife expert, tried to conduct a study of jaguars in this region. Nearly every time he located a tigre to tag with a radio collar, it was killed by ranch hands, despite the laws forbidding this. Illegal hide hunting also plays a major role in the local reduction of numbers of jaguars in the Great Marshes, although reasonable to good levels of population still exist in the more remote areas of the South American and Central American interiors. Once again, it's the old problem of the poacher taking over when the sportsman is forced out by the creation of idealistic but hopelessly unrealistic laws, such as that forbidding the import of any spotted cat pelt into the United States, no matter how legally obtained in its country of origin. When a species such as the jaguar cannot pay its own way through the generation of license fees, rural employment, government export taxes, and the many other financial considerations that have so greatly contributed to the preservation of tens of thousands of square miles of virgin Africa for hunting concessions, instead of being turned over to cattle and goats, it is consequently of no economic value, except for its poached hide on the black market. Who will reasonably pay for the conservation and management of an animal whose only financial impact upon a backwoods economy such as the Mato Grosso is decidedly negative because it kills and eats cattle? The ranchers who own the cattle? Hardly. Of bloody course they're going to order their vaqueros to shoot, poison, or trap any jaguar they can, law or no law. Back in 1977, when I wrote Death in the Long Grass, a collection of my experiences over a decade as a professional hunter and game control officer in Africa, I tried to make this same point about the supposedly endangered leopard. Now, almost 4 years later, it is with intense satisfaction that I find the sportsman's argument may have done some good. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service of the Department of the Interior proposed in the March 24, 1980 Federal Register reclassification for the leopard. One of the paragraphs sounds as if I wrote it. In addition, the Fish and Wildlife Service is proposing to ease its restrictions to allow the importation of sport hunting trophies as an economic incentive to encourage the leopard's conservation by landowners in Africa, where, in some areas, it is indiscriminately destroyed as a predator. Trophy hunting brings additional jobs and income to African citizens and landowners, and added revenue to the governments from tourists and the sale of hunting licenses that may cost $500 or more. It is expected that reclassifying the leopard to give it some economic value will lead to measures to protect it as a valuable resource. Hallelujah, brother! Would it be unreasonable to suggest that the same economic dynamics might apply to some areas of the jaguar's status too? The jaguar, or tigre, literally tiger in Spanish or Portuguese, was once fairly well established in the United States, as well as in its more southern current home. If memory serves me right, Smith & Wesson ran some early dramatic ads for their revolvers featuring jaguars attacking cowboys, presumably in the American Southwest.
Once prowling as far north as Arkansas, It is an extremely rare animal north of Mexico, although some experts feel that it is again expanding its range toward the United States. It is by far the largest of the New World cats, ranking about third in size with the rest of the true panthers, the lion, tiger, and leopard. There has always been considerable discussion about the size of a big jaguar. Appearing to the uninitiated as rather an overweight leopard, estimates vary from 250 pounds as the top weight all the way up to the whopper I saw a poor quality photo of while hunting in Brazil on cattle scales tipping in at 460 pounds, 209 kilograms on the metric scales. There's no doubt in my mind that, as the Brazilians claim, many localized races of jaguars may vary considerably in size because of particular genetic and/or dietary conditions. Therefore, a big jaguar in Mexico might weigh 200 pounds, and in the Mato Grosso as much as 350 or more pounds. One skin from a jaguar killed by Siemel was photographed by the famous hunter and author Russell B. Aitken, who photographed it as bigger than a very large male African lion. No weight was given, if indeed the cat was ever weighed, but the size would indicate well over 400 pounds. Few naturalists would argue that the largest race of jaguars is that of the Mato Grosso, although some very hefty specimens have come from Amazonia. In the Xingu Basin, a southern tributary of the Amazon where I hunted, the largest type was locally called the cangusu, so named for the peculiar swallow wing pattern of the rosette conformation on the hide. 3 distinct types of jaguar were supposed to be recognized in the Xingu, although whether they were merely individual differences between single animals or truly disparate races, I could not say. Despite a cosmetic similarity to the leopard at first glance, jaguars are really quite different, besides being half again heavier and stronger. Possibly they are not quite so agile as the unbelievably shifty leopard, yet are thoroughly arboreal as well as aquatically adapted. For all practical purposes as strong as a lion or a fair-sized tiger, which is the largest of all the cats, the jaguar feeds on virtually any meat he can catch, including swamp deer, tapir, capybara, fish, birds, snakes, alligators, and domestic cattle. Whereas the other big cats, especially lions, tend to kill by biting the windpipe and keeping it closed until their victim suffocates, despite the common belief that they pull down big game in a manner that breaks their neck in the fall, which happens incidentally in my experience. The jaguar usually bites through the top of the skull, driving the canines deep into the brain to cause instant death. Tigres are highly territorial, the usual pattern being that the range of a male overlaps those of 2 or even 3 females. Solitary and highly jealous, jaguars will defend their stomping grounds ferociously from other males.
A very big black or melanistic phase male jaguar I killed in the Xingu back in the 1960s has an epidermis that looks as if it did its undergraduate work at Heidelberg. On the shoulders, neck, and rump are more than 60 deep claw and fang marks, undoubtedly sustained in a lifetime of territorial battles. Since this particular tabby was pushing 300 pounds himself, I wonder what the opposition looked like after he got through with them. A pasting from this chap, which I very nearly got, must have had the same effect as an extended cold shower. One curious aspect to this particular black jaguar, in addition to his rare color phase, is that he does not have the normal long tail of the ordinary tigre. It is more or less a stump, just 13 inches in length. On first examination, I thought it had been bitten off by a rival or perhaps even by piranha, but close inspection shows that unquestionably it is natural, being perfectly rounded and showing no sign of having been amputated. A photo I have of another skin from the same area, also black, obtained by a friend who traded it for Indians, clearly shows the same stump tail.
Now, there's been little enough work done on jaguars as a species, let alone black ones from a region still so nasty that prospectors and missionaries are found clubbed to death with unnerving frequency. So perhaps the Indians are correct that the black jaguar, as found in the Xingu Basin, has evolved into a separate subspecies. Additional to the stump tail as a distinguishing feature, the tribes claim that the pug marks are slightly different, that the call is highly pitched, and that black jaguars will only mate with others of the same genetic mutation. I have no idea of the truth of the matter, but considering the frequency of such mutant traits as extra toes on domestic cats, perhaps the solidification of genetic errata in circumstances of relative confinement, such as the Xingu region, would be possible. On second thought, maybe I'd better cover all bets by suggesting with characteristic modesty that this elusive creature, should it be defined by science, might be handsomely labeled Panthera onca capsticii. Animal behaviorists appear to be in rare agreement that the main factor determining the danger of the jaguar to man lies in its highly developed sense of territorialism. In comparison to the also territorial leopard, by way of example, it is far more likely to stand its ground in the face of real or imagined threat, even by man, and it is this characteristic that is the primary reason for the great majority of jaguar-caused deaths. This situation is at its most deadly when a jaguar, who has taken to preying on a herd of cattle, decides to include the cows as part of his territory, actually considering them possessions to be defended. Unlucky or careless cowboys are usually the victims of this behavior, charged from close quarters as they ride up to the herd. In fact, the death of José Ramos in the Zacatecas Pantanal seems to have been a bloodily classic confirmation of these tactics. In the same vein, individual jaguars are certainly man-killers for other reasons, quite as diverse as those affecting the other great cats of the world, who take up people-pouncing for fun and profit. Oddly, though, actual man-eating is comparatively rare in jaguars, as opposed to simple homicide. There have been no recorded protracted plagues of man-eating by tigres that would in any way compare with the many reigns of terror of the lions, tigers, and leopards of both Africa and Asia. Still, to the hunter or traveler who happens to get his check cashed by a man-killing jaguar, who for reasons of hygiene or heartburn does not eat the body, the point is somewhat moot. Siemel himself wrote that a jaguar who has once killed a man will turn man-eater as soon as he realizes what easy prey people are. Sasha once killed such an animal on the Terere River. This particular jaguar had stalked a vaquero with the obvious intention of making a meal of him, and, cornering him in a hut, did just that. Siemel caught up with the cat 2 days later and killed it with his Winchester.
Chapter 5. The Making of a Jaguar Hunter. Over many weeks after Sasha Siemel watched gap-mouthed for the first time as Joaquim Guato battled the tigre, the two men of different worlds hunted together, the Latvian quickly learning the deft techniques that permitted a fast and strong man to challenge a charging jaguar with only the zagaya and emerge alive. Several times as they fought the great cats together, student and teacher, Sasha nearly was caught by his undeveloped sense of timing the thrust, but always the old Indian saved him with his leaping, darting blade. Siemel learned not only the bushcraft of the unforgiving Mato Grosso, but the true elements of spear hunting. With each fight, he developed better the absolute concentration of the master tigrero, a pure serum that saturated the body and brain of the zagayero, welding confidence, balance, and muscle action into a finely tuned killing machine, leaving the hunter fainting and exhausted, physically and mentally, after he had killed. It was 1925 before Sasha was to hunt his first jaguar alone with the zagaya.
Although Joachim had forbidden him to attempt to spear a tigre by himself, when the old man went off on an assignment to settle a cattle raider, Siemel decided that his time had come. He felt he had developed the concentration and confidence as well as the technique, learning to watch and react only to the feet of the tigre before the charge, as all jaguars attack differently. Some leaping up at the head and throat of the spearman, others charging in low to the ground with feinting movements. Only at the last instant, after the cat had committed himself, the decision could be made to raise or lower the lance point, the decision that determined life or death. Sasha Siemel spear-fought his first solo jaguar, a big male, in the thick marsh grass of the São Lourenço Pantanal, facing a double charge when the cat wrenched himself off the spear blade in his chest and launched himself at the man a second time. It died as the first of 64 tigres that his dog Valente would give him, and the head of the list of the more than 300 jaguars he would kill with various weapons. By 1948, 20 years 5 after his first spear fight, he had taken 281, plus 22 more captured alive. Of his total at that time, which was at least 7 years before he retired, although the last accounting of his kills is not, to my knowledge, recorded in print, 30 were taken with the zagaya, 111 with bow and arrow, and the remainder with a rifle. The different weapons reflecting the fact that jaguars will not charge under all conditions, and in some terrain, use of the spear is impossible. It's interesting to note that some authorities claim it is unusual for a jaguar to tree when pursued by a man with dogs. My experience, and that of other hunters I have consulted on this, has largely been the opposite, as was Siemel's. The difference depends on individual animals and circumstances, although the jaguar is far more likely to leave a tree where hounds have chased him and charge the man when he comes up than is the puma. It is the jaguar that does not tree, however, that is the most dangerous, as it usually indicates that he has been hunted before and knows how to kill dogs. It was precisely this education that was so well used by the famous Assassino jaguar of the Charalles, probably the best known and most feared jaguar in Brazil's history.
Chapter 6: Blood, Loss, and the Death of a Teacher. For 3 years from the day he became a true tigrero, Sasha hunted jaguar with his beloved pack of dogs, led by the great Valente and 2 others named Vinte and Pardo, working as a bounty hunter for cattle ranchers suffering severe losses from jaguar depredation. Except for a few months spent running a small zoo in Sao Paulo and a short trip to Germany, he was in the field. But for the hunting, it was a tortuously sad period of Sasha's life. His brother Ernst was shot in the back and murdered. His best friend, Aparicio Pinheiro, swore to kill him and broke off their relationship over a woman. Near the banks of the São Lourenço, returning from the investigation of his brother's murder at Cuiabá, Sasha stumbled onto the badly crushed skeleton of a man in the grass. Nearby was a tooth-scarred zagaya shaft broken in 2 and the remains of a guato canoe. Joachim Guato had fought his last battle with a jaguar here, probably charged from behind as he dragged the canoe up on the bank. Likely he had seen the tigre from the water, possibly called it with a hollow gourd. From the spear shaft he had gotten a thrust in, but had been overwhelmed. Sasha buried his skull and some fragmented ribs close by where he fell. As if this wasn't enough, Valente was killed and eaten by a female jaguar with half-grown cubs, outnumbered at last. Possibly the only bright spot of these years was the death of Ricardo Favele, who was eviscerated by the terrible piranha fish and blew his own brains out in his agony. Never a dull moment in the Mato Grosso.
Chapter 7: The Return of the Tigrero. The last in this chain of events had been the death of his dog, Valente. Whatever the facts of the matter, Sasha had had enough.
He quit hunting and went to Europe for 4 months, then decided to return to the wilderness to resume his life as a tigrero and to make films of the Mato Grosso. Once more he passed through the haunts of his old friend, Don Carlos, the collector of dried human ears, then on to the Charayes marshes, where he set up a camp near Caracara Island. His surviving dogs, Vinte and Pardo, had been kept for him by a rancher, and now he added another untried but promising lead dog named Raivoso, as well as a small fox terrier he called Tupi, merely a house pet.
Chapter 8. Assassino, the Devil Tiger. The huge cattle-killing jaguar that came to be called Assassino by the backwoodsmen of the Mato Grosso had long ravaged the Pantanal before Sasha ever hunted him. A feline Jack the Ripper, if ever one prowled the lonely morass of marsh, Assassino could certainly be considered a truly murderous maniac, a gigantic male that stalked and killed any animal that crossed his path for sheer fun, leaving the torn and disemboweled bodies where they lay, unless he chanced to be hungry at the moment. There were other reasons, too, why he was not your average garden-variety jaguar. Once having been run by dogs and treed, he had been slightly wounded in the shoulder by a rifle bullet from a nervous vaquero who panicked when he saw the size of the cat. The man ran, and Assassino killed the whole pack of dogs. No dog ever set on his trail from that day onward ever survived a meeting with this great tigre. Assassino's specialty was to stay carefully in the high grass and permit the dogs to follow his scent spoor for as long as it took the pack to become slightly strung out. When one bark seemed well ahead of the others, the jaguar would fishhook back on his own trail and lie in ambush, killing the first dog as it ran by, and then running ahead to repeat the performance until all the dogs were dead. He had also learned never to seek refuge in a tree where the searing thundercrack of a bullet could ever hurt him again. During the years that he had been on his crusade of slaughter, Assassino had earned the reputation as a devil tiger, much the same status man-eaters in Africa and Asia are awarded. It was generally believed that no bullet could harm him, nor could any man kill him in any way. Anybody who hunted him lost all his dogs and never got so much as a glimpse of his anthracite and amber hide. After killing an estimated 400 head of cattle to the south of the Charayes, for some reason he became inactive for a period of time before resurfacing near the Fazenda des Calvados, a large ranch in the Charayes Pantanal. It may have been that he was injured in a territorial battle or was sick for a while. The reason for his absence is unknown. It complements Simel's believability and humility that he freely admits having refused to hunt Assassino, although begged to do so by ranchers on several occasions. He was only too aware, as a professional, that to try to hunt the big tigre with his hounds would be a death sentence for them, skilled though they were. And now, without his lead dog Valente, who might have stood some chance, there was no hope for it. Yet this decision had been made before Assassino killed José Ramos. It was Ramos himself who had ridden into Simel's camp near Ilha da Caracara, his horse lathered and his clothes crusty with sweat. Not taking time to dismount, he implored Simel to come with his dogs to hunt Assassino, who had killed 12 of his small herd. Simel turned him down flat. He was as send the fox terrier pup as his jaguar dogs for all the chance they would have. José Ramos, desperate, begged again, but the most Simel could promise was that he would go after the cat if he saw him or knew he was close by. With a smoldering sense of resignation, Ramos swore to go after Assassino himself. He would kill or be killed. Little did he realize.
Chapter 9. Spear versus Assassino. It was within 2 days of Ramos's visit that Simel noticed a tall, dense column of vultures some miles off over the marshes. Suspecting one of Assassino's calling cards, he investigated and soon found the mangled body of a marsh deer, the carcass badly ripped by claws and teeth, but the meat uneaten. Incredibly, as he went on with the dogs in close control, 5 marsh deer in all were found executed by the assassin cat, the spoor of his huge pug marks unmistakable. Not 1 ounce of meat had been eaten from any of the bodies except for the urubi. Assassino was having a fine day of sport. At the 5th kill, Raivoso lost control and ran off on the scent of the jaguar, Siemel quickly collaring the other dogs lest they take up the deadly trail too. Clenching his teeth in impotent fury, Siemel listened to the bass bawling of the lead dog through the long grass, knowing what he would hear soon. It came as a piercing canine scream of agony that stopped abruptly as a slammed door. Assassino had won again. Siemel was at a complete loss as to how to hunt this insane tigre through the dense cover of the marshes. Back at camp, having buried the tattered remains of Raivoso, he thought back over the jaguar's career, realizing the apparent impossibility of trying to run down the big cat without dogs, at the same time knowing that to expose his pack was as good as shooting them. For hours he pondered the problem. His rifle would be useless in the heavy grass. Only the spear could draw the lifeblood of the tigre at such suicidally close quarters. But he thought, even with the loss of Raivoso, possibly he could use the dogs to get close enough to the jaguar to deal with it. He was still wrestling with the problem the next morning when the thud of Maria Ramos's horse galloping into camp set little Tupi into a paroxysm of excited barking. Maria was a wreck. Half hysterical and bush-torn, she poured out all she knew, that José had gone after Assassino, and only the claw-torn horse had returned with blood on the saddle. To the jungle-wise tigrero, it was like reading a newspaper headline. There was nothing to do but go now and try to find whatever might be left of José. He took 4 leashed dogs, 2 new ones called Amigo and Leon, joining with Vinte and Pardo, and tied the fox terrier to one of the hut poles so he would not follow. Maria led the way along the river to the place where she said José had cut off the trail, refusing when Siemel tried to get her to ride home. She was a woman of the Pantanal and insisted on coming. A mile ahead, the green capao stood like a beacon over the ocean of grass, a strange verdant projection like a lichen-covered rock in some tropic sea. Above it, small specks that were vultures volplaned and circled. José Ramos lay as Assassino had left him, a mass of torn meat lying on its face. As Siemel rolled the corpse over in a loud whine of flies, Maria fainted and nearly fell from her horse. She did not now argue when sent back to the ranch. The sign was as clear as neon. Deep scars marked the spot from which the jaguar had leaped, and blackening speckles of blood freckled the grass stems around the hoof marks. Some yards away lay the unfired percussion gun. Siemel looked around him. If Assassino had knocked a man from his horse once, he would do it again. Also, there was no way to spear fight effectively from horseback. Dismounting, he tied the animal to a tree in a small clearing and took the protective sheath off his zagaya blade. A pistol, probably the ubiquitous Smith & Wesson .38 special revolver, the Brazilian standard against which all other handguns were judged, was in a belt holster. Years later, Sasha would manage to shoot himself with it in the leg while spear fighting a jaguar. In any case, the .38 special cartridge is of little value against a charging jaguar and was carried for delivering the coup de grace. On a hunch, he also took his bow and 2 arrows in case he had the opportunity of provoking a charge with them. A very simple plan. Sasha decided that the cat was probably still quite close, and by releasing the dogs and running after them as fast as he could, there was a possibility that he might throw the jaguar's ambush tactics off. Yes, if he could keep up, maybe there was a chance. He let slip the dogs. After 10 minutes of running through the marsh grass, the vocal bedlam of the dogs ever farther ahead, he knew that he had been wrong. The death shriek of Pardo, the leader, was sounded over the plain, and was followed in less than a minute by the screech of the disemboweled Vinte.
Within 450 yards, Assassino killed all 4 of the dogs in his classic ambush pattern. His lungs afire, Siemel was sick with fury at finding the last one, Leon, in an opening in the capain. And then another bark filtered through the bush and caught his ear. It was the fox terrier, Tupi, who had chewed through his tether and followed his master's scent. As the little dog ran by, barking insanely at the cat smell, Sasha slammed his heel over the trailing end of the broken tether, flipping Tupi over as the line tautened in a full run. As the pet yelped in surprise, that same moment there was the rustle of heavy movement just across the clearing. Then, ominous silence. Carefully, Sasha laid his spear at his feet and nocked an arrow. Without a glance down, he stepped on the little dog's foot, making it shriek with startled pain. It worked. Across the opening, a few stalks of grass twitched. In a single fluid movement, Sasha came to full draw, and his arrow hissed blindly into the tangle as Tupi began to bark again. The thug of the arrow told Siemel he had touched the jaguar, and there was a flurry of movement through the curtain of grass. Scant seconds ticked mutely by, in time with his heaving chest, as he sighted his last shaft and sent it whipping into the cover. Would the confusion of the barking dog and the flash of the arrows bring the charge he needed? The answer appeared in a blur of streaking motion as Assassino, a broken-off shaft protruding from the bunched muscles of his shoulder, ran for a low scrub tree out of pure instinct. He was nearly there when he saw Sasha. The man gulped involuntarily when he saw the jaguar's tremendous size as the cat stopped and then stood glowering at Siemel across a 30-yard open space. The Zagaya in position, the spearman realized that he would never have a fight like this one, very possibly because he would not be alive for the next one. He had none of the advantages of the dogs to break the concentration of the jaguar, to keep him off balance. Furious with the pain in his shoulder, the monster cat would be completely unpredictable in his next attack. It became a battle of nerve and will, the killer tigre measuring the man, stalking back and forth with guttural growls, as if caged, punctuated with screaming roars that fluttered Sasha's guts.
Every sense locked on the cat, he began to move in, edging closer, pushing for the charge. Both man and jaguar were searching for an opening. The tigres came first. It was just the airy flutter of wings, the flap of an urubi vulture settling into a tree above him, but it was enough. The terrible strain broke Siemel's all-important concentration, and he committed the fatal sin of glancing away from the jaguar. In that microsecond, it saw its chance and launched itself straight at the spearman. Off balance, Sasha lunged and pivoted at the same time, the foot-long forged steel spearhead catching Assassino a lucky slice on the neck as the mottled mass of golden-sheathed muscle hurtled by. A giant talon-studded paw glanced off Siemel's right shoulder, knocking him down like a flung doll. In that moment, he should have been a dead man. Somehow, probably because of the shock of the neck wound, the cat was also thrown off balance. Siemel gained the second he needed to roll to the side and scrambled to his knees, the spear blade once more leveled and weaving for a thrust. As lithe as any cat, Sasha regained his feet. He could feel his strength flowing away like sweat, but Assassino was also showing some effect of the heavily bleeding neck wound. Mere feet between them, the two fighters stood panting, eyes locked, for what seemed to Siemel a long time. He knew that if he could drive the blade home once more, he would win. The question was really whether he could stand up to the charge that would make that thrust possible. He did not have long to ponder the question. As if reading his mind, through the blue eyes, the jaguar gave a last terrific roar and exploded straight at Siemel.
It was so fast and from so close a range that Siemel nearly did not manage to lift the spear point in time. As the irresistible impact slammed through the thick shaft of low-row wood, he saw that the blade had caught the throat too high, and a thrill of horror raced over him. So close were the raking claws that he had held the shaft too far forward. As he had seen Joachim Guatto do, he pushed forward hard, withdrawing the spear, and in the same motion plunged it deep into the chest. With the last of his draining strength, he pinned the jaguar down, the lashing of his claws deeply lacerating the spear shaft, scoring the wood as Sasha drove his full weight down. As the tip of the blade passed completely through the chest and grated against the ground on the far side, despite the flesh-buried cross-stop, the paw stroke slowed and, with a great shudder, stopped. How long he leaned on the Zagaya shaft, Sasha Siemel did not know. He did know that Assassino was dead and he was alive. For a long time he sat regaining his strength as Tupi nipped bravely at the dead cat. Finally, able to return to his horse, he rode back to the brush-covered body of José Ramos and returned the corpse to the widow, seeing that she and her child were moved down to the big Fazenda des Calvados. It was 2 days before Sasha was able to return to the lonely little clearing in the Capao that had been the silent arena of one of the greatest known battles between man and beast. Assassino had been largely eaten by the eternal Urubi, but Siemel was able to salvage the skull as a trophy and to measure the body. Assassino's maggot-crawling hulk was 9 feet 3 inches long and estimated by Siemel, who knew his jaguars like nobody else, at something very near 400 pounds.
Chapter 10. The Legend of Sasha Siemel. In many ways, the spear fight with the great assassin Jaguar was a prominent marker along the trail that was Sasha Siemel's life. For a man of such daring and sense of adventure, he was wonderfully human to come to grips with the fact that he had very nearly been the loser of that battle. This seemed to shake him from an interesting angle, possibly influenced by the psychological impact left over from discovering the desolate end of his teacher, Joachim Guatto. No one could ever make the insinuation that Sasha Siemel was afraid of death or dying. That ran counter to every fact of his life. What he did seem worried about, though, was the idea of dying alone, food for birds somewhere in the marshes. With the humility to admit that should he come up against another such tigre as Assassino, he might indeed become the trophy. He never hunted jaguar as a lone tigrero again. He killed many more over his long career with the Zagaya, the Assassino fight having taken place in the summer of 1928, yet always had someone nearby or with him who would know his fate, if not be of any help in the combat. In September of 1928, Sasha joined forces with 3 amateur adventurers, Mamerto Uriolagoita, who later became president of Bolivia, a British photographer named B. Mason, and a writer, Julian Dugid, who later returned to Brazil to write Sasha's early biography. Their venture was a journey across the wilderness of the Bolivian Gran Chaco, following the route of a Spanish conquistador to the Andes. The trip produced the well-known book by Dugid, Green Hell, as well as the later work, Tiger Man, which sprang Sasha, Dugid spelled it Sasha Siemel, into the world adventure spotlight. Siemel married a talented woman, Edith Bray, a Philadelphian whom he met while giving a lecture in that city in 1938. Tying the knot in 1940 in Rio de Janeiro, they had 3 children, the youngest, Sashassino, becoming something of an adventurer and author in his own right. For years, the Siemel family lived in the Mato Grosso on Sasha's houseboat, the Aventurera. Sasha ran hunting safaris and gave lectures in the United States. At one time, he was presented the Adventurer's Medal of the Adventurers Club of New York. When he finally wrote his own story, Tigrero, the book did well and further established him as the giant of adventure he really was. The tigre, called Death,
finally slipped past Sasha's flashing blade in Green Lane, Pennsylvania, in February 1970, when he was nearly 80 years of age. It was my honor to know him slightly, so perhaps you'll take my word for it that never again shall we see his like.
And that brings us to the end of this audiobook. If you enjoyed this reading, please subscribe, like, and share to support the channel and help others discover more great audiobooks. Thank you for listening.